My name is Marcus Briggs. I am 39 years old now, sitting here with a full life, a real marriage, a child on the way, and a business I built from nothing but pain and betrayal. But 10 years ago, I was just a man who thought he had everything. A man who trusted the wrong people with his whole heart and nearly paid for it with his life. So please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Because I believe stories like this need to be heard. They need to reach the person sitting alone somewhere, wondering if they're the only one who has ever been played for a fool by someone they loved. You are not alone. I promise you that. This story starts in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, 10 years ago when I was 29 years old and working as a forensic accountant, the kind of job where you dig through numbers and find the lies people hide inside spreadsheets. I was good at it. Exceptionally good. I could find a discrepancy in a financial report the way a bloodhound finds a scent, quiet, methodical, and absolutely certain. What I was not good at, what I had absolutely no training for, was finding the lies hiding inside the people I loved most. Back then, I believed I had 3 things that made a man's life complete. A career that was going somewhere. A woman who made my heart stop every time she walked into a room. And a mentor who treated me like the son he never had. 2 of those 3 things were built entirely on deception. I should start with her. Her name was Cassandra Lee. Even now, a decade later, something tightens in my chest when I say that name out loud. Not love, not anymore. Just the ghost of a wound that took years to fully close. We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse where I had just finished testifying in a major fraud case. I was exhausted, running on bad coffee and nervous energy, still in my court clothes. She was sitting near the window with a legal thriller open in her lap, and when I accidentally bumped her table reaching for a napkin, she looked up at me with this slow, warm smile and said, "Let me guess. You're either a detective or an accountant." "Forensic accountant," I told her. She laughed and said, "Close enough." That laugh. I want you to understand that laugh, because it was the first thing about Cassandra that made me feel like the world had suddenly gotten warmer. Not louder, not brighter. Just warmer. Safe. Like stepping out of a cold wind into a room with a fireplace going. We talked for 2 full hours that afternoon. I missed 3 phone calls and forgot to eat lunch. She was sharp and funny and genuinely curious about everything. She had her own apartment, her own career in marketing, her own plans for the future, and when I asked her to dinner, she said yes without games, without hesitation, without making me feel like I had to earn it. For 3 years, I thought I was the luckiest man in Phoenix. We spent weekends hiking in Sedona, the red rocks glowing copper in the afternoon sun, her hand in mine, both of us talking about the future like it was this bright, certain country we were already walking toward. We cooked elaborate meals on Sunday evenings, things neither of us really knew how to make properly, laughing over burnt garlic and overcomplicated recipes. She would come to my office sometimes, bringing lunch for everyone, chatting with the receptionist, making friends with the security guard downstairs. Everyone loved Cassandra. Everyone, including my boss. His name was Quentin Hale. And before I understood who he truly was, Quentin Hale was the most respected man I had ever known. He had built Hale Forensic Associates from nothing, absolutely nothing, a one-man operation out of a strip mall office with second-hand furniture and a handful of small clients. By the time I joined him 6 years later, the firm was handling some of the largest financial fraud cases in the state of Arizona. He had a reputation that made defense attorneys nervous and prosecutors grateful. When I walked through his door as a junior associate, fresh out of my second firm and hungry to do real work, Quentin looked at my file, looked at me, and said, "I think you've got the kind of mind this work needs. Don't waste it trying to impress me. Just do the work." I love him for that. Not liked. Loved. The way you love a man who sees something in you that you are still trying to see in yourself. He took me under his wing completely. Not just professionally, but personally. He would stay late to walk me through complex case strategies. He invited me to client dinners and introduced me as someone worth knowing. Some evenings, when the office had emptied out and the city was going quiet outside the windows, we would just talk about life. About his 25-year marriage. About his 2 kids in college. About what it meant to build something that lasted. I respected Quentin Hale more than my own father. And I want to stop right there for just a second because that sentence used to make me feel guilty. It used to feel like a betrayal of something. But I understand now why I felt that way about Quentin. I understand it completely, and it breaks my heart in a way I did not expect. But that part of the story comes later. What you need to know right now is that I had decided to propose to Cassandra. I had been saving for 8 months, skipping lunch, working overtime, driving my old car another year instead of replacing it. Every dollar I did not spend was a dollar going toward a ring that was going to tell her, without a single word, exactly how much I meant what I was about to ask. The ring cost me 3 months of salary. A 2-carat diamond solitaire that caught the light like it had captured a small piece of the sun inside it. When the jeweler handed me that midnight blue box, I held it in both hands for a moment in the parking lot, just standing there in the Arizona heat, feeling something so close to pure joy that I almost did not recognize it. I told Quentin before I told anyone else. I was nervous and excited and needed advice from a man who had made love and marriage actually work. And Quentin clapped me on the shoulder with that big warm hand of his and said, "Son, you're making the right choice. That woman has real character." He offered to lend me his cabin up in Flagstaff for a romantic weekend proposal. I said yes without a second of hesitation. I had no idea that the man offering me his cabin and the woman I was planning to propose to had already been meeting in hotel suites for months. I had no idea that while I was rehearsing a proposal speech, they were rehearsing something else entirely, something that was designed to end me. The warning signs were there. They were always there. I just did not have eyes trained to see the people I trusted as threats. The first sign came 3 months before everything collapsed. I was working late on an insurance fraud case, a construction company that had claimed massive equipment theft, and the numbers were not adding up. I needed to cross-reference some banking records stored in Quentin's office safe, something I had done dozens of times before without a second thought. I walked in without knocking, which I always did, and Quentin jumped up from his desk like a man who had just been caught with his hand somewhere it did not belong. He slammed his laptop shut and said, too quickly, "Brandy, I didn't hear you come in. What do you need?" I told him I needed the Morrison construction files. He told me he would handle that part of the case himself. Told me I should focus on the forensic analysis. Told me not to overwhelm myself with too much paperwork. And he said it with a smile that did not reach his eyes. I shrugged it off. Told myself he was just being protective of a sensitive client file. I was an idiot. The second sign was Cassandra. She started asking specific questions about my schedule. Which nights would I be working late? When was Quentin usually in the office alone? Or the big client meetings happening? She asked these questions the way you ask about the weather, casually, while her fingers were running through my hair, while she was handing me a cup of coffee, while she was smiling at me with those warm brown eyes. "I just want to make sure I'm not interrupting something important," she would say. "Your career matters to me, Marcus. I want to support you however I can." The third sign was money. Cassandra had always been careful with finances. Split restaurant bills, tracked shared expenses to the penny. Then suddenly, she had new clothes I had never seen, jewelry that caught the light a little too expensively, and suggestions for restaurants that were well outside what either of us had ever spent on a Tuesday evening. She said she had landed some freelance marketing contracts. Said business was finally rewarding her the way she deserved. And I was proud of her. I was genuinely, completely proud. I had no idea where that money was actually coming from. And the last sign, the biggest one, the one I completely and totally missed, was how often she started appearing in my office. Bringing coffee for the whole team. Chatting with the receptionist. Stopping by Quentin's office to say hello, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I just wanted to know what kind of woman you're with," she told me once when I asked about it. Oh, he knew exactly what kind of woman she was. And so eventually did I. But not before I carried that ring to Flagstaff with a speech in my heart and a future in my hands. Keep listening, because what happened next in that cabin and what I discovered when I came back to Phoenix is something I have never fully told until right now. The cabin was everything Quentin had promised it would be. Rustic pine walls that smelled like cedar and old firewood. A stone fireplace big enough to stand in. A porch with a view of the Flagstaff Mountains that made you feel, just for a moment, like the whole complicated world had been paused, and you're the only person left in it. I had spent the entire drive up rehearsing my proposal speech. Not out loud, not while Cassandra was awake. She had dozed off in the passenger seat somewhere north of Anthem, her cheek resting against the window, and I had talked quietly to myself, trying out different words, different rhythms, trying to find a sentence that would be worthy of what I was feeling. Everything felt aligned, like the universe had finally agreed to cooperate. We spent Saturday hiking, holding hands on the trail, talking about the future in that loose, easy way couples talk when they feel safe. But there was something off about Cassandra that day. Something I noticed but chose not to examine too closely. She was quieter than usual. She checked her phone when she thought I was not looking. When I asked about it, she said she was expecting an important call from an overseas client. That evening, I built a fire and opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for the right occasion. The ring was in my jacket pocket. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. I was choosing my moment, watching the firelight move across her face, thinking about how she was going to look when I got down on one knee. And then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and something shifted in her face. She stood up and said she needed to step outside for a quick call. 10 minutes, she promised, kissing my forehead. She was gone for 20. Through the window, I watched her pacing back and forth on the dark porch, her free hand moving through the air the way it did when she was arguing or excited about something. Her body language was not the body language of a woman dealing with a difficult client. It was the body language of a woman deeply involved in something that mattered to her. When she came back inside, she was flushed and distracted. She said it was just client drama and poured herself more wine. I put the ring back in my pocket. I did not propose that night. Something in my chest, some quiet instinct I had been ignoring for months, said not yet. Said wait. Said look closer. Sunday morning, Cassandra said she was not feeling well and wanted to go back to Phoenix. The drive home was quiet in a way that felt heavy. When I dropped her at her apartment, she kissed me goodbye quickly, the kind of kiss you give someone when your mind is already elsewhere, and disappeared inside without looking back. Monday came and went without a call from her. Tuesday, a single text saying she was swamped with work. By Wednesday, I was worried enough to stop by her office unannounced, and her supervisor Janet looked at me with confused, sympathetic eyes and said, "She called in sick today. Actually, she's been taking a lot of sick days lately. Is everything all right?" Everything was not all right. That Thursday evening, I drove to her apartment with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant, telling myself I was overreacting, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation for all of it. Her car was not in the parking lot. I went up anyway. Her neighbor, a kind older woman named Mrs. Patterson, who always called me by name, was watering plants in the hallway. "Oh, hello, Marcus," she said warmly. "Looking for Cassie? She left about an hour ago, all dressed up. Had flowers with her, too." Flowers. Cassandra had flowers and somewhere to be on a Thursday night and had not said a single word to me about it. I sat in my car for a long time. Long enough for the takeout to go cold in the passenger seat. Long enough to have the conversation with myself that I had been avoiding for weeks. Then I drove back to her apartment complex, parked across the street where I could see the entrance, and I waited. At 7:30, Cassandra came home to pick up her car. She was wearing the black dress I had bought her for her birthday, the one she always saved for special occasions. She looked beautiful and purposeful and completely unbothered. I followed her across the city to the Phoenician Resort in Scottsdale, one of the most expensive hotels in the state. She walked into the lobby like she had been there 100 times. I waited 5 minutes and then walked in behind her. She was at the bar, and she was not alone. Sitting across from her, leaning toward her with that familiar, easy confidence, his hand close to hers on the polished bar top, was Quentin Hale. My mentor, my boss, the man I had told I was planning to propose. The man who had lent me his cabin so I could do it. For a moment I could not breathe. I ducked behind a wide marble pillar and just stood there, pressing my back against the cold stone, trying to make sense of what my eyes were showing me. I watched them from a distance for over an hour. Watched the way she touched his hand. Watched the easy intimacy of two people who did not need to try to impress each other anymore because they had already moved past that stage. When they got up to leave, I followed them to the elevators. They went up to the 8th floor. I took the stairs and stood in that quiet carpeted hallway. Room 847, hearing their muffled voices and Cassandra's soft laughter traveling under the door. I will not describe what I heard beyond that. I do not need to. You already understand. I walked back to my car alone. The Phoenix night was warm, and the city was lit up and beautiful, and I felt completely, utterly hollow. Like someone had reached inside me and removed whatever it was that had been keeping me upright. The woman I was going to marry. The man I called a father. Together in that room. I sat in my car for a long time and let myself feel every part of it. The grief. The humiliation. The rage. I let it move through me completely because I knew what was waiting on the other side of it. Clarity. And I was going to need every bit of it. Because what I did not yet know was that this was not simply a betrayal of the heart. This was a coordinated scheme. And I was the target. Stay with me. Because the moment I discovered what they were actually planning to do to me, what Quentin said to my face in that office with terrifying calmness, it will change the way you look at everything that came before it. I spent Friday at the public library. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I needed to think somewhere quiet, somewhere neutral, somewhere that did not carry the fingerprints of everything I had just lost. I used the library computers to research employment contracts, partnership agreements, whistleblower protections, and financial fraud statutes. I read until my eyes were dry and my notes filled both sides of 3 pages. Then I called Dale Mercer. Dale and I had served together in the National Guard years earlier. He was a former Army sergeant who now ran a private security and investigations firm. The kind of man who had seen enough of the world's dishonesty to be unsurprisable, and who treated every problem like a logistics challenge that simply needed the right solution. When I told him what I had seen at the Phoenician, he did not offer sympathy. He asked me what I needed. Surveillance, I told him. Professional documentation. Everything. Dale met me at a diner Saturday morning, pressed shirt, military haircut, eyes that took in everything and gave nothing away. He listened to the full picture without interrupting and then said, "Your boss is sleeping with your fiancée, and you think there's more to it than just an affair." "It has to be," I said. "The timing is too precise. The partnership offer, the cabin, all of it. None of it makes sense as coincidence." Dale nodded, pulled out a notebook, wrote down addresses, car descriptions, usual schedules. He called me the following Wednesday with his preliminary report. "Your boss's expensive habits," Dale said. "Hotel suites, 5-star restaurants, shopping trips. Either he's flush or he's trying very hard." He paused. "Tuesdays and Thursdays at the Phoenician. Some Sunday afternoons at his house when his wife visits her sister. Your girl has been staying at his place more nights than her own apartment." Each sentence was a stone dropped into still water. "There was something else," Dale continued. He had followed Quentin to a law office. 2 hours inside. Came out looking like a man carrying weight he had not managed to put down. I want you to sit with that for a moment. My mentor, the man who had shaped my career for 3 years, was secretly visiting lawyers. And my girlfriend of 3 years was spending nights at his house. I was the last person in my own life to understand what was happening. Monday morning, I walked into Hale Forensic Associates with a recording device in my shirt, placed there by Dale, and a resignation letter folded in my jacket pocket. Dale was parked in the garage below, with 2 FBI contacts I had spent the weekend reaching. Because I had spent Saturday afternoon on the phone with Agent Vivian Rodriguez, a specialist in financial crimes who had already been building a separate case around suspected fund mismanagement at forensic accounting firms across Arizona. When I told her what I suspected, she did not dismiss me. She asked me to come in. I walked into Quentin's office and closed the door. He looked up with that familiar, warm smile, and for just a half a second, I felt the old pull of it. The version of this man I had believed in so completely. And then I let that go. "I know about you and Cassandra," I said. The smile vanished. Completely. Like a light switched off. What replaced it was something I had never seen on his face before. Calculation. Cold, unhurried calculation. He tried to deny it for approximately 4 seconds, and then he leaned back in his chair and laughed a laugh that had nothing warm in it and said, "Well, I suppose it's time for an honest conversation." He stood and walked to the window. That familiar pose. Hands behind his back, looking out at the city, like a man surveying something he owns. "How long?" I asked. 8 months, he said, without hesitation or shame. 8 months sleeping with your fiancée. As for planning to dismantle your career. He turned around. "Since the day you started getting too close to my financial arrangements." The room seemed to contract around me. "What financial arrangements?" "I've been redirecting funds from client settlement accounts," he said, with the tone of a man discussing whether, temporarily, to cover personal expenses, the divorce proceedings, alimony, keeping up a standard of living that my income alone no longer fully supports. I always intended to replace what I borrowed. "That's theft," I said. "You're stealing from clients." He waved a hand. "I prefer temporary reallocation." "But you started asking about the Morrison construction case, wanting access to files that would have shown the discrepancies." I needed a distraction. I felt the shape of everything shifting into terrible focus. "So you seduced Cassandra." "She approached me," he said, and the pride in his voice was nauseating. "Your sweet Cassandra has quite an appetite for the better things in life." When I explained that her boyfriend was getting dangerously close to information that could destroy both our futures, she became very motivated to help. I thought about every question she had asked me. Every night she had visited the office. Every time she had sat in Quentin's office chatting casually while I worked 2 rooms away. She had been feeding him information, and feeding him my schedule, and feeding him every detail he needed to protect himself from me. "The partnership offer," I said. Quentin smiled. "Completely real. I plan to make you a partner. Partners are complicit. Much harder to blow the whistle on a firm when your name is on the door. When you share in the profits." He paused. "But if you discovered the theft anyway, Cassandra was prepared to testify that you had been acting strangely, talking about wanting to get rich quickly, that you had access to all the relevant accounts and files." He tilted his head slightly. "Who do you think a jury would believe? The respected founding partner? Or the junior associate?" "I don't have a criminal record," I said. "You would have had one," he replied, with a quietness that was more frightening than shouting would have been. "It's remarkable what can be found on a man's computer after he tragically takes his own life. Overwhelmed by guilt over embezzling from the clients who trusted him." The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest thing I have ever heard. He was not just planning to steal from me. He was not just planning to frame me. He was planning to kill me and bury the evidence in a fabricated story about my own guilt and despair. And somewhere in that plan, the woman I had bought a diamond ring for was going to be the one who stood up in court and confirmed the lie. "There is one problem with your plan," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "I'm not as stupid as you thought I was." I held up my phone and showed him the recording application. Everything he had just said had been broadcasting live to 3 separate recipients, including Agent Rodriguez. Quentin's face went the color of old ash. The door opened behind me. Dale stepped in, followed by 2 FBI agents, and the rest moved quickly. But just before they let him out, Quentin looked back at me with something raw and ugly in his eyes and said, "Cassandra has information about your family, boy. Information that will destroy everything you think you know about who you are." And then he was gone. I stood in his empty office for a long time after that. I did not know yet what he meant, but I was about to find out. And what Cassandra told me when I drove to her apartment that afternoon shook something loose inside me that has never fully settled back into place. Do not go anywhere, because part 4 is where this story goes somewhere I was completely unprepared for. Cassandra answered her door in a bathrobe, her hair loose, clearly just pulled from sleep even though it was midday. When she saw my face, she knew. She could read me the way you can read someone after years of watching them. "Quentin's been arrested," I told her. "The FBI raided the office this morning." She went through every emotion in quick succession. Surprise, fear, a flash of rage, and then resignation, settling over her like a coat she had been expecting to put on for a while. "How much do they know?" she asked. "Everything," I said. "The embezzlement, your involvement, the fake marketing contracts, the plan to frame me. All of it." She stepped aside to let me into her apartment, but I stayed in the doorway. I was not there to be let in. I was there for 2 things, my belongings and the truth about whatever Quentin had said about my family. "Whatever he told you," I said, Whatever information you have about my family, it will not work as leverage. My mother's medical bills are completely documented and legitimate. Cassandra looked at me for a long, strange moment, and then she laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Something more exhausted, more bitter. Your mother's bills? She said softly. Marcus, you still don't understand what I have. Then tell me. She walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a manila folder. She held it for a moment before handing it to me with both hands like something heavy. Your father did not die in a car accident when you were 10 years old, she said. I did not move. He's alive. He has been in federal prison for the past 15 years. Tax evasion, fraud, conspiracy. Your mother has been visiting him twice a year, every year, since his conviction. She never told you because she was ashamed of what he did and terrified of what knowing would do to you. I looked at the folder in my hands. Inside were prison records, court documents, visitor logs with my mother's name, her signature, the dates, twice a year, every year, stretching back 15 years. My father, whom I had been told died heroically in a car crash when I was 10 years old. My father, whose photograph sat on my mother's mantelpiece in her house in Tucson. My father, who had been alive this entire time. I stood there in Cassandra's doorway, and I felt something I do not have a clean word for. It was not grief exactly. It was not rage. It was the feeling of standing on ground you have walked on your entire life and suddenly understanding that the ground was never solid, that the whole landscape of your own history was built on a story someone else chose to tell you. I looked up at Cassandra. Even in that moment, she flinched slightly, expecting me to collapse or explode or both. Thank you, I said. She stared at me. For what? For showing me that the only person I can truly count on is myself. I took the folder. I walked back to my car, and I sat there for a very long time before I started the engine. Then I drove to Tucson. My mother was in her garden when I pulled into the driveway. She was watering her roses, moving slowly with the careful deliberateness of a woman still rebuilding her strength after a stroke. And when she heard my car, she looked up and smiled that familiar smile. The smile faded when she saw my face. We need to talk about Dad, I said. She set down the hose with hands that had started to tremble. I showed her the documents without speaking. I watched her read them, or pretend to read them, because she already knew every word on every page. She sat down heavily in her patio chair, and the sound she made was not a word. It was something older than words. The sound of a woman who has been carrying a secret for 20 years and has finally been relieved of it, even if the relief arrived the wrong way. How did you find out? She whispered. Does it matter? Your father, she began, and then stopped. Started again. He got involved with people he should never have trusted. He owed money he could not repay through honest means. He started doing what he knew how to do, which was accounting, but he did it dishonestly. He skimmed from clients. He hid money. By the time it caught up with him, there was no way out. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. When he was convicted, you were 10 years old. You worshipped him. How was I supposed to explain to a 10-year-old boy that his hero was a criminal? By telling me the truth, I said. My voice was even. I was working very hard to keep it that way. I thought it would be easier, she said. I thought a dead father was less painful than an absent one. I thought a boy who believed his father died a hero would grow up stronger than a boy who knew his father chose wrong and got caught. We sat together on that porch for a long time. She told me things she had never said out loud. How he had written to her from prison asking her to bring me to visit. How she had refused year after year, telling herself she was protecting me. How he had eventually stopped asking, but never stopped writing. How there was a box in her closet with 15 years of letters addressed to a son who never knew they existed. I asked her to get the box. She went inside and came back carrying it with both arms, setting on the patio table between us like an offering. I did not open it that afternoon, but I took it with me when I left. That night, lying in my childhood bed for the first time in years, I thought about what it means to be betrayed by someone who loves you versus betrayed by someone who never did. Quentin and Cassandra had used me as a tool and planned to discard me. There was no love in what they did. No conflict. Just cold calculation. My mother had lied to me for 20 years out of something that started as love. even if it had calcified over the years into something more complicated than that. Shame, fear, the inability to undo what she had set in motion. It did not make the lie right, but it made it something I could eventually choose to forgive. The box of letters sat on my passenger seat the entire drive back to Phoenix. I did not know yet what was in them. I did not know yet that my father had spent 15 years becoming a different man than the one who had broken the law and left his son behind. I did not know that he had been eligible for parole and had asked, quietly and without any pressure, through my mother, whether I might ever want to meet him. And I did not know that my answer to that question was going to be one of the most important decisions of my life. I will tell you what happened when I made that decision. And I will tell you what I built in the years that followed. And the woman who made it mean something, and the moment 8 years later when Cassandra walked back into my life wanting to be led in again. Part 5. The last chapter, and the one that, I hope, makes everything else worth it. I resigned from Hale Forensic Associates 2 weeks after the arrest. Not because I had to. I could have stayed. The FBI had cleared me completely, and with Quinn gone, the firm needed someone steady at the helm. Multiple people told me I was the obvious choice, but I had spent 3 years building my professional foundation on ground that turned out to be rotten beneath the surface, and I did not want to rebuild on the same plot. I took my savings, the money I had been setting aside for a life with Cassandra, and I rented a small office on the east side of Phoenix. I called Dale. I said, I want to build something real. You in? Dale said, yes, before I finished the sentence. We called it Briggs Forensic Solutions. The first months were hard in the way that honest work often is. No safety net, no established client base, no name recognition. Just competence, integrity, and the willingness to outwork everyone in the room. Agent Rodriguez sent us our first case, a suspected insurance fraud that required careful financial reconstruction. We solved it in 3 weeks. She sent us another one. Slowly, then quickly, the way real things grow when they're planted in good soil, the business became something. But the work, as much as I loved it, was not what healed me. 3 months after opening our doors, I walked into a coffee shop downtown on a Tuesday morning because the espresso machine in our office had broken and Dale had refused to work without proper coffee. There was a line. I stood in it. The woman in front of me dropped her wallet, and when we both bent to pick it up at the same time, we nearly collided, and she looked up at me and laughed. Not a performance of a laugh. Not the kind designed to be noticed. Just a real, full, unguarded laugh at the minor comedy of 2 adults almost knocking heads over a fallen wallet. Her name was Beatrice. She was a pediatric nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Her hands had calluses from honest, careful work. There were laugh lines at the corners of her eyes from years of finding reasons to smile in hard places. She wore her hair pulled back practically and did not seem to care at all that it was not perfect. When she found out I was a forensic accountant, she tilted her head and said, "So you catch bad guys with math? That's actually pretty cool." We talked until the coffee shop started filling up with a lunch crowd. I asked her to dinner. She said yes. On our first date, she did not ask how much money I made or where I saw the business in 5 years or what kind of car I drove. She asked me what I actually liked about my work. She asked about the cases that had stayed with me. She asked what I wished I could have done differently. She was interested in who I was, not in what I could provide or what I knew or what I had access to. I had forgotten that such a thing was possible. We took it slowly, intentionally slowly. I told her about Cassandra and Quentin before a third date, sitting across a restaurant table, watching her face while I said things I had not said out loud to anyone except Dale. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said simply, "I'm glad you got out." Not, "I can't believe they did that to you." Not, "You poor thing." Just, "I'm glad you got out." Like a person who understood that surviving something was the point. I knew, somewhere in that moment, that this woman was different in the way that actually matters. Now I want to stop here for a second because I need to ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life, a partner, a mentor, a friend, someone you gave your whole trust to, only to discover that trust was being used against you? Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the inside out after a betrayal that touched every part of who you were? Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because stories like ours deserve to be told and heard and believed. 8 years after the night I followed Cassandra to the Phoenician, I was standing at a mutual friend's anniversary party when she walked across the room toward me. She looked older, softer maybe. The brightness she had always carried so deliberately had settled into something quieter, less performed. She was nervous. I could see it in the way she held her glass. And when she reached me, she said my name like it was both familiar and uncertain. Brandy. Wow, it's been a long time. It has, I said. We talked for a few minutes. She told me she was married, 5 years now, to a good man, nothing like Quentin. She said it with something in her voice that I chose to read as genuine. She said she had heard the business was doing well. I told her we were expanding into New Mexico, and then she said, I owe you an apology. I was greedy. I was selfish. I threw away something real for something that was never going to last. I looked at her for a long moment. Apology accepted, I said. She blinked. Just like that. Carrying that anger for 8 years would have poisoned my life. I told her, not yours. I chose to let it go a long time ago. We exchanged a few more sentences about nothing much in particular, and when she asked if we could stay in touch, I told her kindly but clearly that we could not. I drove home that night feeling something I had not expected to feel. Nothing, in the best possible way. Not numbness, not repression, just the quiet, solid feeling of a door that had been closed properly, latched, and left behind. The next morning her name appeared on my phone from an unknown number. Hey, I noticed you left early last night. I was hoping we could talk more. Maybe meet up sometime. I deleted the message. I blocked the number. Some people hold on to the idea of a story even after the story is finished, and that is not something you can fix for them. You can only protect the peace you have built. That morning over breakfast, Beatrice noticed that I was unusually quiet. She asked if everything was okay. I took her hand across the table, looked at the woman who had spent 5 years choosing me every single day, not because it was exciting or profitable, but because she genuinely wanted to, and I said, how would you feel about renewing our vows for our anniversary? She cried a little. The good kind. That afternoon, I drove to a federal facility outside Tucson. My father, Calvin Briggs, was 65 years old now, gray-haired and thinner than the photographs my mother had kept, but with clear eyes that held something I had not expected to find there. Peace. Not the manufactured peace of a man performing rehabilitation. The real, quiet peace of someone who had spent 15 years reckoning honestly with what he had done. We had been meeting monthly for 3 years by then, ever since his parole. How are things, son? He asked. Good. Busy. We're expanding into New Mexico. He smiled. I'm proud of you. You built something honest. Something that actually matters. I learned from both your mistakes, I told him, and from Mom's example. He nodded slowly, and there was no defensiveness in it. Just a man accepting what was true. Any word on grandchildren? I smiled at him across the table. BA's pregnant, I said, due in December. His eyes filled with tears, and he did not try to blink them back. And in that moment I saw my father, not the criminal, not the ghost my mother had made of him, not the stranger who had been a photograph on a mantelpiece my whole childhood. Just a man, flawed and changed and grateful in mind. That evening, Beatrice and I sat on our porch while the Arizona sky went through its colors, gold to pink to the deep blue that precedes the stars. She was reading a book about babies, her hand resting quietly on the curve of her belly, and the neighborhood was so peaceful and ordinary that it almost hurt to look at. She asked, without looking up, any regrets? About before. The life you had. The woman you almost married. I thought about all of it. The ring in the midnight blue box. The cabin in Flagstaff. The hotel hallway. Quentin's cold laugh. My mother's garden. A box of 15 years of unread letters. None, I said. Every single thing that happened led me here. To you. To this. Even the worst parts. Maybe especially the worst parts. They taught me what real love actually looks like. She looked up then. What does it look like? I gestured at our quiet porch, at the ordinary, unheroic, completely beautiful life we had made together. This, I said, someone who chooses you every day. Not because it's exciting, not because of what you can give them, just because you are who you are, and that is enough. She squeezed my hand, and the stars came out one by one over Phoenix. And I sat there, a man who had been lied to and used and nearly destroyed, and felt nothing but grateful. The boy who was betrayed is gone. The man he became built something that lasts. And if you're sitting somewhere right now, carrying the weight of someone else's betrayal, I want you to hear this. It does not have to define you. It does not have to be the last thing that happens to you. The worst chapters of life are not the whole story. Keep going. The best part might be closer than you think.